Welcome everybody. In this video, we are going to talk about lists and for loops. Lists are one of the more complicated variable types in Python. They're very, very useful. You see them everywhere, and they take a little bit of time to wrap your head around. And for loops are another type of basic loop, and they make the most sense in conjunction with lists, which is why we're talking about them together. I will point out again, I have created a separate Python file for this. I've created my outline and my header. Please make sure you're doing this when you're following the videos. You should be making a file. You should be making a separate file for your skills checks and uploading those to my Cassidy, which you've all been doing correctly so far. Okay, so a list is a special type of variable that can have multiple values. You use square brackets to indicate a list in Python. So when we're declaring a variable like some integer, we just give it a value, right? If we want to declare a float, we give it a value that has a decimal in it. We have to use an equal sign. And if we want to declare a string, then we do something like that. Same thing for bools, none types, the variable types we've covered so far. You just create them with the appropriate type of data, and it automatically creates that type of variable. Lists are similar. A list is a variable that you create using square brackets. So if you want to create an empty list, it looks like this. And PyCharm will complain about you if you create an empty list like this, or at least it used to until I turned that off. Don't worry about it. This is a totally fine way of creating an empty list. Lists are collections of things. You can have a bunch of different things in a list. So I could have a list of my favorite fruits. I could have a list of student grades. Let's not say 45. Let's say everybody's doing pretty good. I could have a list of Booleans. And you can have a list with multiple types in it. A list doesn't just have to contain a single type of variable. So I could have a list something like personal information, that's my age, I'm 39 years old. True, I'm registered to vote, right? So these could be different pieces of information in order: name, workplace, age, and is the user registered to vote. So these are all valid ways of making a list, right? This list has 4 strings in it. This list has 5 ints. This list has 5 bools, and this list has 4 different things: 2 strings, an integer, and a boolean. So a couple of things that are important about lists: they are ordered. So these items are internally stored in this order in the list. There are some other data structures that are not ordered. A dictionary, we'll talk about those later, are not ordered, but a list is defined by the order that the elements are in. We can go to the Python console, and we can create these lists in the Python console. I'm just going to copy and paste this code in here. This is going to give us a good view into what sorts of things we're creating over here. So I'm going to pull this back a little bit. And you can see that I've got favorite fruits as a list, personal information as a list, student grades as a list, truth states as a list. I can drop these lists down, and I can see that element 0, in Python, lists are 0 indexed, which means that the first element in the list has the index 0. Sometimes you'll hear me call that the 0th element. Sometimes I'll call it the first element. But please be aware that if you are starting at the beginning of a list, that is always the 0th element. So this has a string, a string, a string, a string, and it's also got a hidden attribute. We don't need to worry about this right now, called length, which tells us how long it is. Personal information has, you'll notice it's got a string, an integer, and a boolean. That's totally valid inside of a list. And these other lists look the way that we'd expect them to: 5 ints and student grades, and 5 booleans and truth states. So the way you reference lists, the way you work with lists and work with the items in lists, we're going to work in the Python console for this. So if I just print out a list as a whole, it looks like this. It's going to give me the entire list. It's going to give me the square brackets, and it's going to give me the elements in quotes because they're strings. Usually that's not how you work with a list. Usually you want to work with the individual elements in a list. So I can pick out the individual elements in a list by doing this. I use square brackets, and I put a number in between the square brackets, and that tells it what element to print out. You'll frequently hear me refer to this as favorite fruit sub 0. This little, the square brackets with the number inside of it or the index inside of it, you say that's sub. So this is favorite fruit sub 0. So I want you to think in your head what's going to happen before I press the enter key. Prints out apple. You'll notice there's no strings because there's no quotes because it's giving me a string, right? Inside of the list, it has the quotes to indicate that it's a string. But when I print favorite fruit sub 0, I just get apple, and I can inspect this by doing something like print type favorite fruit sub 0. It's always important to know what types of objects you're working with. So the 0th element of favorite fruits is a string. But favorite fruits itself is a list, right? Those are different types of object. A list is a container. This list happens to have strings inside of it. So there's a couple of different ways I could work with this. I could say I want to print out all the elements in the list. So I could do it manually. I could do that. I could do 1. I could do 2. I could do 3. And then if I try and do 4, it won't let me. It gives me a specific type of error, right? Index error, which is the type of error you get when you're trying to access something in a list that doesn't exist. And it says list index out of range. Interestingly enough, in Python, I can go backwards. So -1 gives me the last element in the list, regardless of how long the list is. I can get the next to last. Oops, get out of here. I can get the third to last. I can get the fourth to last. But in this list, I can't get the fifth to last because that is also out of range in the other direction. So you got to be careful and make sure that you are indexing the actual things that exist in your list, or else you're going to get errors in your program. So let's say I wanted to iterate through a list, and I might not know how many items are in it when I'm writing the program, so at coding time. Maybe because I'm asking a user to enter in a list of, say we're making a program. This is what we're going to do at the end of the video. Say we're making a program where you enter in a list of grades, number grades, and you say what letter they are, but you don't know in advance how many number grades there are going to be. You need a different way of going through the list so that you can actually address all of the elements if there's 1, if there's 5, if there's 50, or if there's 5,000. It's one of the ways you need to be thinking about things as you're getting a little bit more advanced in programming is you can think, will this work with a couple of things? You can also think, will this work if I've got 5 or 50 or 500,000 of them? If you're programming well and robustly, your program should work. They should work when your objects get big or when your use cases get big, stuff like that, when possible. So let's take a look at how to walk through the list up here. And I'm going to go back into the main code window to do this. And you'll notice I'm going to go ahead and run this. If I run this, it doesn't actually generate any output because I'm just creating stuff. I'm not doing anything with it. So there's a couple of different ways to go through a list. So let's do it in a way that is unusual first. So list index is 0. It's going to be a first thing in the list. And I am going to, we want to walk through the list. Student grades. And you'll notice when I create a list in the Python console, I get this little hidden attribute called __len__. These little double underscores, they're called, sometimes they're called magic methods or magic attributes, but they give you really important information about the objects themselves. So I want to walk through everything in the list. I want to do a loop while list index is less than student dot, and this dot is, you'll notice it colors it purple because this is a special attribute. This dot means the length belongs to student grades. It's not an element in the list, it's a property of the list. Let's see, I spelled index wrong. If the distinction there is not entirely clear to you, that's okay. Just know that this means I am going to keep on going while the list index is less than the length of student grades. So I want to print student grades sub list index, right? Because I want to pull the list indexed element out. So when it's a 0, I want to pull the 0th element out. When it's a 1, I want to pull a 1, etc., etc. Then after I pull that out, I want to increment it. Super important here. I need to increment it. I'm starting with 0. I need to grab the 0th element, so I need to increment it after I print out the element. So let's go ahead and run this. Doesn't like that. It's a function. So we need to run it like that. Okay. These little parentheses here. I thought it was a property. It's actually a function that returns the length. So we're going to run it like that. Okay. That works. So I get 100, 100, 98, 97, 101. You'll notice that is all of the elements in student grades. Now, if I did this in the other order, it would number 1 not give me all of the items in the list, and number 2 it would actually give me an error at the end. So let me show you what's going on here. List index starts at 0, and 0 is less than studentgrades.len. This is equal to 4. Because there are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 elements. Actually, I think it's equal to 5. Let's find out. Let's find out what it's equal to. When in doubt, use the language to learn about the language. So, run it. Yeah, it's a 5. It's equal to 5. That's the length of the list. Okay. So, the reason this breaks, we start at 0. 0 is less than 5. We go in here, increment it to 1. We print the first element. So first we've skipped the 0th element. It gets to 4, goes in here, increments it to 5. 5 is not less than 5. However, we don't recheck the condition until we get back to the beginning. So we try and print out student grade sub 5, which doesn't exist because that would be the 6th element. So this is to say, in the last video, I talked a lot about the order these things go in and being careful with your indexing. This is why. There's also another way to do this. There's actually 2 other ways to do this. We're going to talk about another way. You can use the len function. While list index is less than the length of... This is actually doing the same thing. This is the easier way to do it. This is what you'll see most people do. But this len function, under the hood, it's using that double underscore len method to figure out what the length is. So this is saying the exact same thing. While the list index is less than the length, I'm going to run this, and it'll work this time. And it gives me all the elements. So this is good. There's other ways to do this using for loops, but this is one way to walk through all of the elements in a list if you need to do it. The other way to do it is the more common way in Python. And this is one of the, most languages don't have for loops like this. This is actually one of the really nice features of the Python language. So I'm going to say something like this. For k in, and then the name of my list. Oh, and you'll notice I need to reorganize this, so we're going to add lists up here. I do like to keep my code organized. I do this when I'm actually writing programs for myself, just to make sure I have the right stuff under the right heading. Okay, 4K in student grades. This is a very, very simple chunk of code. I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. 3 ticks here, 3 ticks here. So right now, all that's running is my little variable declarations. And then these 2 lines of code, 4K in student grades, print K. So you'll notice this is going to print out all of the grades as well. And we're going to put this here because this is for loops. So what is going on here? The for loop is a really sophisticated and nice little structure. So this says, for every element in student grades, I want you to go through this loop one time. And in the loop, K is going to point to that element. It's going to be a reference to the element. So the first time I go through this loop, K references the first 100. The second time I go through this loop, K references the second 100. The third time I go through this loop, K references the third element, which is 98. It'll look be a little bit more obvious if I do favorite fruits, because that's going to print out K has the value, and I say references. It holds the value. It actually points to it. It doesn't create a copy of the value. It like references the underlying string object here. You can actually see this here. Let's do this. This is one of the reasons we learned ID early on. It lets us understand the mechanics of the language. So we're going to print the ID of favorite fruits sub 0. And then we're going to print the ID of K in here too. So you'll notice this one, which is the ID of favorite fruit sub 0, and this one, which is the ID of the first K, these are identical because the first time going through the list, K is a reference to this first thing here. Second time going through the list, it's a reference to this. Third time going through the list, it's a reference to this. Fourth time, it's a reference to this. Now, we can't actually change those strings using this structure because strings are immutable in Python. We'd have to create a new string. We can do that, but we can't do it inside of a for loop in this way. So usually you use these for loops if we're going through and printing them out or getting the values and doing something with them. Okay, so this is how you iterate through the loop. Super, super important to understand here. K changes the value, what K is pointing at, the value of K changes every iteration in the loop. I'm butchering my loop here, hold on. It changes every iteration in the loop. It points in order, because lists are ordered, to everything in the list. This is the best and easiest way of iterating through everything in a list. Sometimes you need to use this method or a related method to get through a list and know what index you're at. But in most cases, you're going to do it this way. And then I could test these, right? I could say if K is equal to apple, print I like apples too. Else, just print the K, right? So I'm going to run this, and when it gets to apple, it prints I like apples too, and for the other ones, it prints banana, coconut, durian. You'll notice my ID is still printing out here. This is a different ID because I reran it. It's a different variable. But this is how you iterate through a list. A couple of really useful things in Python. In a list, you can check membership by using the in operator. So if apple in favorite fruits, print apple is one of our favorite fruits. When I run this, apple is in the list, right? We're going to go back up here. We're just going to print out the values in the list. And it's complaining because there's a weird tab there. I'm going to back that up. So this is my list. Apple is in the list. It prints apple is one of our favorite fruits. You'll notice lists are strings are case sensitive. So if I have a capital A apple, it's not going to print this out because capital A apple isn't in favorite fruits. It can be in there twice, and this will still evaluate to true. If it's not in there, it won't evaluate. It'll evaluate to false. We could test this in the Python console. So we could do bool apple in favorite fruits. That's going to evaluate to true. Bool apple with a capital P in favorite fruits. That's going to evaluate to false because it's not a member of the set. And this is a very fast operation in Python. It's really nice. You use this sometimes. One other thing to cover, there is a unusual type of variable called a tuple. Lists are mutable in Python. That's actually a really important thing to know. So I can change my lists. So let's do this. I'm going to print out the ID of favorite fruits here in the Python window. It starts with 140, ends with 832. And then I'm going to use the append function, which is the best way of getting an item in a list. So I'm going to say favorite fruits dot append eggplant. So you'll see over here, eggplant gets added, and if I print the ID, it's the same. 140 ends in 832, and that's because lists are mutable. You can change them, and they'll have the same value. So we're going to add that little note up here. Use the to add to a list. You can also prepend if you want to add to the beginning of the list. Lists are ordered, append adds to the end. You'll usually use append. You can also use remove to remove an item from anywhere in the list. So let's say we stop liking bananas. I can say favorite fruits dot remove banana. And it takes the banana out. You can see over here it's gone. If you try and remove something that's not in there, it'll give you an error. It'll give you a value error. So if I wanted to be smart about this, I could say if ba in favorite fruits, don't need the parentheses again because we are not in C++. Favorite fruits dot remove ba. And you could do this with a variable, right? You could have a variable value here instead of a string literal. But this is going to keep me from getting that error because I'm testing to see if it's in the list first, and I'm only removing it if it's in the list. So append, remove takes something out of a list. And the in operator tells us if something is in a list. You'll notice I did something that I only talked about very briefly. I'm saying favorite fruits dot remove. When you run a function that belongs to an object, a list is a type of object in Python. Use the dot operator to say, hey, I want to use favorite fruits the list's remove function, and I want to remove the item ba. It's called an argument. We'll talk about this later. But the thing you're passing into the function goes in parentheses. The dot means that this function right here belongs to favorite fruits. Like I said, we'll get into this in more depth in the future. But for right now, just know that this is how it looks like when you use it. To remove something, to append something, you use a dot again. Use a dot append. In is an operator, so you don't use a dot with it. Okay, that was a lot of material. I want to just recap it really quickly. Oh yeah, a tuple. See, this is so much material, I'm forgetting stuff. A tuple is a special type of list-like object that's immutable. And you use parentheses, so a tuple is like a set value. You could use a color, right? A red, green, blue color. Let's see, red, green, blue. This is going to be purple. Actually, let's put this down here so we can see the tuple show up. So when I do this, it creates a tuple called my tuple. You'll notice it is a 3-length tuple, and it's also ordered. Tuples can have any types of objects in them, just like lists. Really, the two differences between a tuple and a list is, one, a tuple you create using parentheses, not using square brackets, and two, a tuple is immutable. You cannot change a tuple once you create it. You can address a tuple just like you address a list. You can check for membership in a tuple, which is true, obviously. It works just like a list, except it's immutable. Use a tuple when you want to make sure something doesn't change, when you've got a set of values but you don't want it to change. If we were using color, for example, in a video game, and we wanted that color to always be the same, we don't want it to be a different length, and we don't want it to change suddenly, we'd use a tuple. We're not going to use tuples a ton in this class, but it's an intermediate programming class, so you need to know about them. Okay, that's for real now this time, the end of the material. So we talked about how to create lists using square brackets. Lists can contain any type of object in Python. They can even contain other lists. We'll talk about that later. They can contain multiple types of objects in the same list. When you are picking out an individual object in a list, which is what you'll do most commonly, you use the square brackets and you put a number that corresponds to the index of the item. It starts with 0. You say that favorite fruit sub 0. To go through an entire list, there's a couple of different ways of doing it. You can use the list index, which is the number position of the stuff in the list, and you have to figure out some way of using a loop to go through them and making sure that your little variable that you're using to pick the individual elements out of the list doesn't go over the length. Or you can do 4K in the list. There's some times when that doesn't work super well, but generally this is how you do it. When you write this code, it goes through an iteration for every item in the list, and K is a placeholder variable, points to each item in turn. This can be anything, by the way. This variable, you just need to use it consistently. K is what it is by convention, but this is going to do the exact same thing. I could call it J. If I have two nested for loops, I could call it Q. I could call it, Red Rover, whatever you want. This variable right here is the name of the placeholder. So when I'm printing, or the name of the reference is really a way of thinking about it. So when I'm printing out the reference, I want to make sure that I have the right name here. You will almost always see this 4K. In Python, it's almost universally 4K in. I don't know why. Okay. You can add things to lists by using append or prepend, take things out of lists by using remove. They're mutable, so we can change them. And the in operator tells us if something is in a list. A tuple is a list-like object that's not mutable. Okay. A lot of talking, a lot of concepts. I want to do a skills check that sort of combines all of this stuff. It's also going to teach you how to do something which is reuse old code. One of the reasons I'm having you keep all this stuff, and one of the reasons I'm having you make different files for all of this, is it is super duper important to remember to and learn how to reuse your old code. So I want you to make a program that prompts the user for number grades, saves them in a list by appending them, and then goes through that list and tells and says for each grade what the letter grade is, what the Cassidy letter grade is. You will have to do a couple of things in this. Note, you have to figure out how to let the user tell you when they're done entering grades. If you want an additional challenge, get their names too. Get names and grades, and names and number grades. And for each name, print out a string with the name, the number grade, and the letter grade. And I said you'll have to reuse your code because the part of the code to convert number grades into letter grades for the Cassidy grading scale, you should have already written that by the time you get here. Copy and paste it into your skills check and then build the rest of this around it. So what I want you to do for the skills check, make a program that prompts the user to input number grades, put them in a list, and then go through the list and print out what the letter grade is for each number grade. If you want a bigger challenge, write a program that doesn't just get numbers, it gets names and number grades, and then prints out the letter grade for the names. Okay, it's been a big video, covered a lot of concepts. This skills check, if you can get through this, it walks you through all the stuff that we've done in this video. As always, if you have questions, if I'm there, just raise your hand. We'll take a look at it together. If I'm not, write them in an email or save them for the next time I'm in class. And again, thank you for your attention and good luck with the skills check on this one.